I still remember the exact moment my husband laughed, raised his glass, and called me his charity case. Right there, in front of his colleagues, in front of strangers. Let's be honest. Daniel smirked. Without me, Teresa wouldn't have anything. The room went quiet, but no one defended me. Not even him. And I didn't say a word, because in that moment, I realized something he clearly forgot. Something with both our signatures on it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have loved you, I want you to stay with me. Like this video if you believe respect matters more than money. Subscribe if you enjoy stories where truth comes out in the end. And tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I didn't respond that night. Not when Daniel laughed. Not when his friends avoided my eyes. Not even when the waitress awkwardly set down the dessert no one touched. I just sat there quietly, folding my napkin like I'd done 1,000 times before. Controlled, polite, invisible. Because here's the thing about being married for 25 years. You learn when silence is weakness, and when silence is power. That night, it was power. On the drive home, Daniel didn't apologize. He loosened his tie, leaned back in the driver's seat of his new Mercedes, and said, "You're being too sensitive, Teresa. It was a joke." A joke. I stared out the window at the Chicago skyline lights blurring through my tears I refused to let fall. "You humiliated me," I said quietly. He sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "Oh, come on. Everyone knows I've been the one carrying this family." That word again. Carrying. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because if he really believed that, then he had forgotten everything. And I mean everything. We weren't always like this. 25 years ago, we didn't even have a car. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, with peeling paint and a heater that worked when it felt like it. The kind of place where winter felt personal. Daniel was just a guy with big dreams and no direction. And me, I was working 2 jobs. Morning shifts at a diner, night shifts at a grocery store. I still remember the smell of coffee clinging to my clothes, mixing with the cold air as I walked home at 2 a.m. Daniel used to sit at the tiny kitchen table, books spread everywhere, studying for his MBA. "You don't have to do all this," he'd say. But he never stopped me, not once, because we both knew the truth. He needed me, and I believed in him. I believed in him when no one else did. When his own father told him he'd never make it. When his first business idea failed and left us with credit card debt we couldn't pay off for years. I was there. I paid the bills. I picked up extra shifts. I sold my grandmother's jewelry without telling him, just to keep the lights on. And every time he looked at me, he'd say, "One day, Teresa, I'm going to make it up to you. We're going to have everything." We. That word used to mean something. I used to fall asleep next to him, exhausted but hopeful, believing that one day all of this sacrifice would turn into something beautiful. And for a while, it did. When Daniel finally graduated, I remember crying in the audience. Not because it was his achievement, but because it felt like ours. He got his first real job in a mid-sized firm. Nothing glamorous, but steady. We moved into a slightly better apartment. Bought secondhand furniture that didn't wobble. We laughed more back then. We touched more. He used to hold my hand while watching TV like he was afraid I'd disappear. Then came the promotions, the late nights, the business trips. At first I was proud. "Look at you," I'd say, straightening his tie. "Mr. Important." He'd smile, kiss my forehead, and say, "None of this happens without you." And I believed that too. Years passed. We moved to Chicago. Bought a house. A real house. 2 stories. A backyard. A kitchen big enough for holidays. I remember standing in the doorway, the first night, keys in my hand, thinking, we made it. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It wasn't sudden. It never is. It started small. Daniel began making decisions without asking me. At first, it was things like investments, business, partnerships, things I didn't fully understand. "I've got this," he'd say. "Trust me." And I did. Then it became money. Our joint account turned into his account. "Let me handle the finances," he insisted. "It's simpler that way." I told myself it made sense. He was the one earning more now. But more eventually turned into everything. I didn't notice when my access slowly disappeared. I didn't question it when I had to ask before making larger purchases. I didn't realize when I stopped being a partner and started becoming an afterthought. Until one day, I did. It was something small. I wanted to donate to a charity I'd supported for years. Nothing extravagant. Just a few $100s. Daniel looked at the request like it offended him. "Do we really need to be giving money away like that?" he said. I blinked at him. "Daniel, we've always done this." He shook his head. "That was before. We have different priorities now." Different priorities. That was the first time I felt it. Not anger, not even sadness, just distance. Like I was standing on one side of a glass wall, watching a man I used to know become someone else. And I think that's when it started. The quiet erosion. The subtle way he began rewriting our story. In his version, he was the one who built everything. In his version, I was just there. Supporting character, background noise, and eventually a charity case. When we pulled into the driveway that night after the dinner, Daniel got out without waiting for me. He walked inside, loosened his cuffs, and turned on the TV like nothing had happened. I stood in the car a moment longer, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my chest tight. 25 years, reduced to a joke. I finally stepped out and followed him in. He didn't look up. "Are you coming to bed?" he asked casually. I watched him for a long second, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger who had rewritten history and expected me to agree with it. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." He shrugged. "Suit yourself." Just like that. No apology, no awareness, nothing. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I sat alone in the living room, the house we built together, and stared at the walls. And I started remembering things. Not the good memories, not the love, the details, the conversations, the choices, the documents. Especially one document. One piece of paper signed long before we had anything worth protecting. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt patient. The next morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. That was always his way. Erase, rewrite, move on. I was in the kitchen when he walked in already on a call, talking about numbers I no longer understood. "Yeah, we closed at 8 figures, he said, casually pouring himself coffee. "I'll have my assistant send over the projections." My assistant, not ours. His. He ended the call and glanced at me like I was part of the furniture. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," I replied. He shrugged. "You'll get over it. Get over it." I studied his face. Same man, same features. But something inside him had hardened. Or maybe something inside me had finally opened. "Daniel," I said carefully, "do you really believe what you said last night? Same man, same features." But something inside him had hardened. Or maybe something inside me had finally opened. "Daniel," I said carefully, "do you really believe what you said last night?" He didn't even hesitate. I believe I've worked hard for what I have. That's not what I asked. He sighed, already irritated. Teresa, don't start this again. Again. Like my feelings were repetitive noise. I'm asking you, I said, keeping my voice steady. Do you really think I contributed nothing? He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. I didn't. The counter, arms crossed. I didn't say nothing, he replied. But let's be honest, you didn't build this. There it was. Clear, clean, final. I felt something inside me go very still. Right, I said softly. Because arguing with someone who has rewritten history ain't nothing, he replied. But let's be honest, you didn't build this. There it was. Clear, clean, final. I felt something inside me go very still. Right, I said softly. Because arguing with someone who has rewritten history is like trying to convince a stranger you used to be married. He grabbed his keys. I've got a meeting, he said. We'll talk about this later. But we never did. Because Daniel didn't do conversations anymore. He did conclusions. The front door shut behind him, and the house fell silent again. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the coffee he'd poured. He didn't even ask if I wanted any. I walked over, picked up the mug, and poured it down the sink. Not out of anger, out of clarity. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I checked our finances, or at least I tried to. I sat down at my laptop, typed in the login information I had used for years. Access denied. I tried again. Still denied. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. That had never happened before. I reached for my phone and called him. He picked up on the second ring. What he said, distracted. I can't access the account, I told him. Oh, he said like it was nothing. Yeah, I had to update some security stuff. Why didn't you tell me? It's not a big deal, Teresa. Not a big deal. My name is on that account. Relax, he said. If you need money, just ask. Just ask. I closed my eyes. 25 years. And now I had to ask. For groceries, I said. For anything, he replied. I'll take care of it. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, okay, and I hung up. Not because I agreed, because I understood. That conversation told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't a partner anymore. I wasn't even an equal. I was managed. That realization didn't come with tears. It came with something colder. Observation. That day I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Daniel's routines, his habits, his tone, and the things he didn't say. He started coming home later. Not every night, just enough to feel intentional. When I asked, he always had an answer. Client dinner, board meeting, travel prep. Always professional, always reasonable. Too reasonable. And then there was his phone. Daniel had never been secretive before. We used to leave our phones lying around without a second thought. Now, it was always face down. Always within reach. Always locked. One night, he stepped into the shower and left it on the nightstand. For a moment, I just looked at it. I could hear the water running. I could hear my own heartbeat. I wasn't that kind of woman. I never had been. I believed in trust, in privacy, in respect. But respect had already been taken from me. So what exactly was I protecting? Slowly, I picked up the phone. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Maybe because somewhere deep down I already knew what I would find. The screen lit up. A message. Just one line. From a name I didn't recognize. Chloe. I miss you already. I stared at those 4 words: simple, soft, intimate, not business, not professional, not innocent. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I didn't even feel shocked, just confirmed. I opened the thread. There weren't many messages, but there didn't need to be. Plans, hotels, inside jokes I didn't understand, and one photo. I hesitated before opening it. Then I did. A young woman, mid-30s maybe, blonde hair, polished smile, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. She was standing close to Daniel. Too close. His hand on her back. Familiar. Comfortable. Like it belonged there. I stared at that image for a long time. Not comparing myself. Not questioning my worth. Just observing the truth. The water in the bathroom shut off. I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. By the time Daniel walked out, I was already lying in bed, eyes closed. "Still awake?" he asked. "Just tired," I murmured. He got into bed beside me like he always did, like nothing had changed, but everything had. I lay there staring into the darkness, listening to his breathing, feeling the distance between us even though our bodies were inches apart. And that's when I made a decision. Not emotional, not impulsive, strategic. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Because if there was one thing Daniel understood, it was control. And I had just realized something very important. He thought he had all of it, but he didn't. Not even close. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, not even the disrespect. It was the clarity. The kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. I moved through the next few days like nothing had changed, because that's what Daniel expected. And for the first time in a long time, I gave him exactly what he wanted. Silence, agreement, compliance. But underneath that, I was watching everything. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings. Quick. Distracted. Like checking off a task. "Busy day," he'd say. Of course I'd reply. I even smiled. That part surprised me. How easy it was to pretend. But when you've spent years shrinking yourself to fit someone else's version of you, pretending becomes second nature. The difference now, I wasn't pretending for him anymore. I was pretending for me. Because I needed time. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to prepare. 3 days after that dinner, Daniel came home later than usual. It was close to midnight. I was sitting in the living room reading a book I hadn't turned a page of in over an hour. He walked in slightly startled to see me awake. "You're still up?" he asked. "I couldn't sleep," I said calmly. He loosened his tie, avoiding eye contact. "Long day," he muttered. I studied him, the faint scent of perfume. "Not mine. You must be exhausted," I said. He nodded quickly. "Yeah." Meetings ran over. Meetings. I almost admired how easily he lied. Almost. "Daniel," I said softly. He paused, one hand on the back of a chair. "What?" I closed the book and set it down. "When did you stop seeing me?" The question hung in the air. Not accusatory, not emotional, just honest. He frowned, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, really seeing me," I continued, "not just looking past me." He let out a short laugh, but there was tension behind it. "This again." "No," I said. "Not again. Just once." He shook his head. "Teresa, I don't have the energy for this tonight." Of course he didn't. He never did. Because real conversations required accountability. And accountability didn't fit into his version of reality. Okay, I said simply. That seemed to surprise him more than anything. No argument, no tears, no escalation, just acceptance. He hesitated for a moment like he was trying to figure out what game I was playing. Then, he shrugged it off. Good, he said. I'm going to bed. I listened to his footsteps fade upstairs, and then I sat there in the quiet, counting. Not seconds, not minutes, moments. Moments I had given, moments he had taken, moments that now meant nothing to him. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't just about another woman. Chloe wasn't the cause. She was the symptom. The real problem, Daniel believed his own story. He believed he had built everything, that I had simply benefited. That belief, that was the foundation of everything that came next. And if I wanted to break that foundation, I needed more than emotion. I needed proof. The next morning, I made a phone call. One I hadn't made in years. Law offices of Richard Hayes, the receptionist answered. My heart tightened at the name. Richard Hayes. The man who had sat across from us 25 years ago. The man who had insisted quietly, firmly, that we sign something before Daniel's first. We signed something before Daniel's first a business deal. Hi, I said. This is Teresa Morgan. I'm not sure if Mr. Hayes is still there, but... There was a pause. Mrs. Morgan, the receptionist, replied. Please hold. T business deal. Hi, I said. This is Teresa Morgan. I'm not sure if Mr. Hayes is still there, but... There was a pause. Mrs. Morgan, the receptionist, replied. Please hold. My pulse quickened. A moment later, a familiar voice came on the line. Older, slower, but unmistakable. Teresa. I closed my eyes briefly. Yes, it's me. Well, it'll be, he said softly. It's been a long time. It has. I agreed. There was a gentle pause before he asked, How can I help you? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because saying it out loud. I'll be, he said softly. It's been a long time. It has. I agreed. There was a gentle pause before he asked, How can I help you? I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to say, but because saying it out loud made it real. I need a copy of a document, I said. What document? I swallowed. The prenup. Silence. Then very carefully he said, Does Daniel know you're asking for this? No, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. I see, he said. His tone shifted slightly, more formal, more precise. Do you still reside at the Chicago address we have on file? Yes, I can have a certified copy sent to you, he said. But Teresa. Yes, you should come in. My chest tightened. Why? Because I think he said slowly, You may have forgotten what's actually in that document. Forgotten? That didn't make sense. I remember the basics, I said. We signed it before his first investment deal. Yes, Richard replied. You did. There was something in his voice now, something cautious. Teresa, he continued, that agreement was not standard. My grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean? I mean, he said carefully, it wasn't designed to protect Daniel. The room felt suddenly smaller. What? I whispered. You should come in, he repeated, as soon as possible. I hung up the phone slowly, my mind racing, not designed to protect Daniel. That didn't make sense. That wasn't how I remembered it. Back then, Daniel had been the one so worried. He insisted we sign it, said it was just in case, said it would make investors feel more secure. I hadn't questioned it. I trusted him. I trusted us. But now I wasn't so sure what I had actually signed, or what he had, or what either of us had forgotten. That afternoon, I stood in front of my closet staring at rows of clothes I rarely wore anymore. I reached for something simple, classic, the kind of outfit that didn't ask for attention but commanded respect anyway. Because whatever I was about to walk into, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Richard Hayes's office hadn't changed. Same dark wood panels, same leather chairs, same quiet weight in the air, like decisions made inside those walls carried consequences far beyond them. I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. He studied me for a long moment. "You look different," he said gently. "I am," I replied. That seemed to satisfy him. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. My name was on it, Teresa Morgan. Seeing it there felt strange, like meeting a version of myself I had forgotten. "This," he said, placing it carefully on the desk, "is your prenup." I stared at it but didn't touch it. "Before you open it," he continued, "I need to remind you of something." I looked up. "You are the one who requested this agreement." I blinked. "That's not possible," I said immediately. "Daniel insisted on it." Richard shook his head slowly. "No, Daniel agreed to it, but the request came from you." The room tilted slightly. "That doesn't make sense," I whispered. "It does," he said calmly. "You just don't remember the details." I swallowed hard. "Then tell me." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. 25 years ago, Daniel was about to enter his first major business deal. Investors were concerned about liability marital assets and potential risk exposure. I nodded slowly. "That part sounded familiar. What you may not remember," he continued, "is that Daniel's financial situation at the time was unstable. Unstable was an understatement. He was broke. We both were. So the investors suggested a standard prenup," Richard said, "one that would protect Daniel's future earnings and assets." That sounded exactly like what I thought we had signed. "But you didn't agree to that version," he added. My brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You asked for modifications," he said. My heart started to race. "What kind of modifications?" Richard opened the folder and turned it toward me. "Read it." My hands moved slowly, almost reluctantly. I flipped through the pages. Legal language, clauses, terms. At first, it all blurred together. Until it didn't. My eyes landed on a section highlighted in yellow. My breath caught. "In the event of marital dissolution," I read quietly, "all assets acquired during the marriage shall be considered jointly owned." I frowned. That was normal. But then I kept reading. "With a weighted distribution favoring the supporting spouse in cases where one party's career advancement was made possible through the direct or indirect contributions of the other." I froze. Supporting spouse. That didn't sound like a standard prenup. My eyes moved faster now. Clause after clause, language that didn't protect Daniel, language that protected me. "This can't be right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is," Richard replied calmly. I looked up at him. "Why would I do this?" He didn't hesitate. Because you were the one taking the risk. The words hit me harder than I expected. You were working 2 jobs, he continued. You were covering living expenses while Daniel pursued his degree and business ventures. You were the financial foundation at the time. I stared at the document, my mind racing through memories I hadn't revisited in years. Late nights, double shifts, sacrifices. You insisted Richard said that if Daniel succeeded, it would be recognized as a shared achievement. Legally. My throat tightened, and he agreed, yes. Without hesitation, without argument. Back then he believed in us too. So, what does this mean? I asked, my voice steadier now. Richard closed the folder gently. It means he said that if you were to divorce, you would not be left with nothing. That wasn't surprising, but more importantly, he continued, it means the court would consider your contributions as foundational to his success. My chest rose slowly, and he held my gaze. And in many cases like this, that results in a significantly favorable settlement for the supporting spouse. Favorable. That word didn't begin to cover it. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all settling in. All these years, all these assumptions, all those moments where Daniel acted like everything belonged to him. He had forgotten, completely. Or maybe he chose to forget. Does he know I asked? Richard's expression didn't change. If he does, he said he's never mentioned it. I let out a slow breath. Of course he hadn't, because if Daniel remembered this, he would have never called me a charity case. He would have never taken full control of the finances. He would have never made me ask for money that was legally mine. A quiet anger began to build. Not explosive, not loud, but deep, steady, controlled. The kind that doesn't burn out. It sharpens. Teresa Richard said carefully, I need to ask you something. I looked at him. Are you considering divorce? The question hung there, heavy, final. I thought about Daniel, about Chloe, about the way he had looked at me like I was less, about the years I had given, the parts of myself I had buried, the woman I had become just to keep the peace. And then I thought about something else. Myself. The version of me that had once sat in this very room, strong enough to demand protection for her future. That woman hadn't been weak. She hadn't been dependent. She had been wise. I'm considering my options, I said finally. Richard nodded slowly. That's a good place to start. I stood up the folder in my hands. Can I take this? I asked. It's yours, he replied. I hesitated for a moment. Richard, why didn't I remember any of this? He gave a small, knowing smile. Because, he said gently, when life gets comfortable, people stop looking at the fine print. Fine print. That's where the truth had been hiding all along. I left his office with the folder pressed against my chest. The air outside felt different. Sharper, clearer, like something had shifted. Because it had. For years, I had been living in Daniel's version of reality, his narrative, his rules. But now I had the truth, and more importantly, I had leverage. When I got back home, Daniel wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. The house was quiet, still. I walked into the living room, set the folder down on the table, and just stood there for a moment, looking around at everything we had built, everything he believed belonged to him. I placed my hand gently on the folder, and for the first time since that dinner, I allowed myself a small smile. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, but out of something far more powerful. Certainty. Because Daniel had no idea that the charity case he thought he was supporting was actually the one who held the entire foundation of his world in her hands. I didn't confront Daniel right away. That would have been too easy, too emotional, too predictable. Instead, I waited. Not passively, strategically, because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. And more importantly, I was preparing. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He looked lighter, relaxed, like a man who believed everything in his life was exactly where it should be. "Hey," he said casually, dropping his keys on the counter. "You made dinner?" "I did," I replied. "Roasted chicken? Vegetables. His favorite. Not because I cared, but because I wanted him comfortable. Safe. Men like Daniel only reveal themselves fully when they feel in control." He smiled as he sat down. "You've been in a good mood lately," he said. I poured him a glass of wine. "Have I?" "Yeah." He shrugged. Less tense. I almost laughed. Less tense. That's what he thought this was. Peace. When in reality, it was distance. The kind that happens right before something breaks. "I've been thinking," I said, sitting across from him. "About what?" he asked, cutting into his food. "About us." He sighed. Not annoyed, just uninterested. That was worse. "What about us?" he asked. "I think we've lost something," I said calmly. He didn't even look up. "That happens," he said. "It's called marriage." There it was. Dismissal. Minimization. A lifetime of emotional neglect wrapped in one casual sentence. "And you're okay with that?" I asked. He shrugged again. "It's normal, Teresa. We're not 25 anymore." No, we weren't. At 25, we had dreams. At 55, he had entitlement, and I had silence. Or at least I used to. "I don't think I'm okay with it," I said. That made him pause. He looked up finally. "What are you saying?" I held his gaze. "I'm saying I want to revisit our financial arrangement." That got his attention. Immediately. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "I mean," I said evenly, "the way we handle money doesn't feel balanced." He leaned back in his chair. A defensive posture. Familiar. "It is balanced," he said. "I earn. I manage. You don't have to worry about anything." There it was again. That narrative. The one he had built over years. "I do worry," I said softly. "About what he challenged. About being dependent," I replied. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You're not dependent," he said. "You're supported." I let that sit between us. "Is that what you call it?" I asked. "What would you call it?" he shot back. I didn't answer right away. Because this moment, it mattered. "Charity," I said quietly. The word landed, hard. He froze, just for a second. Then his expression shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. "You're still on that?" he said, forcing a chuckle. "Come on, Teresa." That was a joke. "No, it wasn't. We both knew that." "It didn't feel like one," I said. He rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic." There it was. Dismiss, deflect, diminish. the 3 tools he always used. But this time, they didn't work. Because this time, I wasn't trying to convince him. I was letting him reveal himself. I want access to the accounts, I said calmly. Silence. Not shocked, not confused, controlled, calculated. No, he said, just like that. Flat. Definitive. I nodded slowly. Why not? Because it's complicated, he replied quickly. Investments, business structures, you wouldn't understand. I almost smiled, because now he was exactly where I needed him to be. Then help me understand, I said. He shook his head. It's not necessary. Necessary. That word again. Everything about me had become unnecessary to him. My opinions, my presence, my existence in his world. All these years, I said slowly, I've trusted you. And you still should, he replied, without hesitation, without irony. That's the problem, I said. His jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, leaning forward slightly, trust without transparency isn't trust. It's control. The word hit him. I saw it. The shift. The irritation. The threat. I'm not controlling you, he said, his voice colder now. No, I asked gently. You don't work, he continued. You don't deal with finances. That's not control. That's division of responsibilities. Division. Not ownership, not partnership. Division. And if I want to change that, I asked. You don't need to, he snapped. There it was. Finally. The real Daniel. Not the polished version. Not the charming businessman. The man who believed he had authority. Over me. You're making something out of nothing, he added. No, I said quietly. I'm finally seeing something for what it is. He stood up abruptly. I don't have time for this, he said. I have an early meeting. Of course he did. He always had somewhere to be when things got uncomfortable. He grabbed his glass, drained it, and walked toward the stairs. Then he paused. Teresa, he said without turning around, don't start a problem where there isn't one. And then he left. I sat there in silence. The empty plates, the untouched wine, the echo of his words hanging in the air. Don't start a problem. But the truth was, the problem had always been there. I had just been too quiet to name it. Now I had named it, and soon I was going to expose it. The next morning, I didn't wait. I drove straight back to Richard's office. He looked surprised to see me again so soon. Teresa, he said. Everything all right? No, I replied. But it's about to be. I sat down and placed the folder on his desk. I want to know everything I said. He nodded slowly. Then we need to talk strategy. That word sent a calm through me I hadn't felt in years. Strategy. Not survival. Not endurance. Strategy. What are my options? I asked. Richard leaned forward. Well, he said, based on this agreement, you have more power than you think. Power. For so long I had felt powerless, invisible, small. And yet, all this time, I had been the one holding the strongest card. I just didn't know it. Tell me, I said, and for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to listen. Strategy. That word stayed with me long after I left Richard's office. For years, my life had been reactive. I adjusted to Daniel. I adapted to his moods, his rules, his version of reality. But now I had something he didn't expect. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to move without him noticing. First, Richard had said you don't confront him with the prenup yet. I had frowned. Why not? Because once he knows you understand your position, Richard replied, he will change his behavior. That made sense. Daniel wasn't careless. He was calculated. If he realized I had leverage, he would protect himself, hide things, move assets. No sudden moves, Richard continued. You observe, you document, you prepare. So that's exactly what I started doing. Quietly, carefully, like a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to reclaim. The first thing I noticed was how much I didn't know. Daniel had built an entire financial world I wasn't part of. Different accounts, different investments, different conversations I had never been invited into. I started small. One morning, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. Not to snoop emotionally, but to understand. Emails, bank notifications, calendar events, names I didn't recognize, companies I had never heard of. One name kept appearing. Evelyn Carter. At first, I thought it was business. Meetings, lunches, late calls. But something about the frequency didn't feel professional. I didn't jump to conclusions. Not yet. Because assumptions are messy, and I needed clarity. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. The same one we had used for years. The same one where I had never asked questions. Until now. The young woman at the counter smiled politely. How can I help you today? I'd like to review our joint accounts, I said. She typed for a moment. Then her expression changed slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said. You're not listed as an authorized user on these accounts. I blinked. That's not possible, I said. These are marital accounts. She shook her head gently. Only Daniel Morgan is listed. The words felt surreal, like hearing something that didn't belong in my reality. But I've been married for 25 years, I said. I understand, she replied kindly. But legally, access depends on how the accounts are structured. Structured. There it was again. Everything with Daniel was structured, controlled, hidden behind systems I had never questioned. Is there anything I can access, I asked. She checked again. There is one account, she said. A savings account under your name. My name. Finally, how much is in it? I asked. She hesitated, then told me. The number was small, painfully small. After 25 years of marriage, that was all I had direct access to. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said, and I walked out. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in public. But in my car, I sat for a long moment staring at the steering wheel, trying to process the reality I had just stepped into. Daniel hadn't just controlled the finances. He had erased me from them. Completely, legally, systematically, deliberately, and for years I had let it happen. Not because I was weak, but because I trusted him. That realization hurt more than anything. Not the betrayal, not the control, the trust. The way I had given it so freely, so blindly. But pain, when it's clear enough, becomes power. Because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. Again, he smelled like cologne I didn't recognize. Sharp, new. Long day, I asked casually. Yeah, he replied, loosening his tie. Meetings. Busy? Always? He didn't elaborate, didn't ask about my day, didn't notice anything had changed. That was his biggest mistake. He underestimated silence. Because silence is where awareness grows. Who's Evelyn? I asked suddenly. He froze, just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it, clear as day. Then he recovered. Who, Evelyn Carter? I said calmly. You've been meeting her a lot. He walked past me, too quickly. She's a consultant, he said. For what? Business strategy, he replied. Short answers, controlled tone. But his body told a different story. Tension, avoidance, distance. Must be important, I said lightly. She is, he replied. No hesitation, no clarification, just confirmation. I nodded and let it go, for now, because again, this wasn't about confrontation. It was about understanding the full picture. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was upset, but because my mind was awake, connecting dots, patterns, pieces of a life I had lived without truly seeing. The prenup, the accounts, the secrecy, Evelyn. It wasn't just one thing. It was a system, and systems can be dismantled, but only if you understand how they're built. The next morning, I called Richard again. I need a financial investigator, I said. There was a pause. That's a serious step, Teresa. I pause. That's a serious step, Teresa. I know, I replied. But I need to know what he's hiding. Richard exhaled slowly. I can recommend someone, he said. Discreet, experienced. Good, I said. I don't want Daniel to know. Then we move carefully, no, I replied. But I need to know what he's hiding. Richard exhaled slowly. I can recommend someone, he said. Discreet, experienced. Good, I said. I don't want Daniel to know. Then we move carefully, he replied. Carefully. That word again. Everything now required precision, timing, control. For the first time in years, I was stepping into a world Daniel thought I didn't belong in. His world. And I was going to learn it, piece by piece. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even just about respect. It was about truth. And the truth was starting to reveal something far more dangerous than I expected. Because if Daniel had hidden this much from me, what else had he buried? And more importantly, how far was he willing to go to keep it hidden? The investigator's name was Michael Reeves. Richard described him in one sentence. He finds what people try very hard to hide. That was exactly what I needed. We met 2 days later in a quiet cafe across town. Neutral ground, safe. He didn't look like what I expected. No flashy suit, no intimidating presence. Just a calm, observant man in his early 60s with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. You're Teresa, he said, sitting across from me. I am. Richard had clearly briefed him. I understand you want to look into your husband's financial activities, he said. Yes, and possibly more than that, he added. I held his gaze. Yes. He nodded once. Then we start with patterns. Patterns, I asked. Money leaves traces, he said. So do people. That sentence stayed with me, because Daniel had always believed he was careful, precise, untouchable. But even careful men leave patterns. I handed Michael the few details I had. Names, dates, the mention of Evelyn Carter, the bank information I was denied. He didn't react emotionally, just processed. Give me a week, he said. A week? I asked. That's enough to see the outline, he replied. After that, we decide how deep this goes. A week. 7 days of not knowing. 7 days of pretending everything was normal. 7 days of watching Daniel like I hadn't watched him in years. And suddenly, everything looked different. He was on his phone more, guarded. Stepping outside to take calls, coming home later. Leaving earlier. Subtle changes. But once you see them, you can't unsee them. On the third night, I made a small move. Nothing dramatic. Just intentional. I was thinking we could have dinner out this weekend, I said. He barely looked up. I've got plans, he replied. Work. A pause. Yeah, he said. That lie came too quickly, too smoothly. All right, I said. I didn't push, didn't question. Because again, this wasn't about catching him in a lie. It was about letting him build a pattern. And he was doing that perfectly. By the 5th day, I wasn't even angry anymore. Not in the way I used to be. No tears, no emotional reactions. Just clarity. A quiet, steady understanding that the life I thought I had wasn't real. At least, not for a long time. On the 7th day, Michael called. Can you meet? He asked. His tone was different, more serious. I can, I said. We met at the same cafe. This time, he didn't waste time. I found her, he said. Evelyn Carter. My chest tightened slightly, and I asked. She's not just a consultant, he said. Of course she wasn't. What is she? I asked. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Photos, documents, records, proof. She's connected to one of your husband's shell companies, he explained. Shell company, a business that exists mostly on paper, he said. Used to move money discreetly. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Why would he need that? I asked. Michael looked at me carefully. To hide assets. There it was. Not just control. Not just secrecy. Deception. Legal. Intentional. Dangerous. I turned another page. More documents. Transfers. Large ones. Amounts that made my small savings account feel like nothing. When did this start? I asked quietly. About 5 years ago, he said. 5 years. That hit harder than I expected. Because 5 years ago, that's when things between us started changing. That's when he became distant, cold, unreachable. Not because of stress, not because of work, but because he was building something else. A separate life. Is she? I couldn't finish the sentence. Michael didn't soften it. Yes, he said. They're involved. The word landed heavier than I thought it would. Involved. Not an affair in the dramatic sense. Not a mistake. A relationship. Sustained. Intentional. I closed the folder slowly. For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I was shocked, but because everything made sense now. The late nights, the secrecy, the financial control. It wasn't random. It was a plan, and I had been outside of it. Completely. What else? I asked. Michael leaned back slightly. There's more, he said. Of course there was. There's always more. He's been moving money into accounts tied to that company, he continued, positioning assets away from marital visibility. I exhaled slowly. So, if I had left without knowing, you would have walked away with very little, he said. There it was, the full picture. Not just betrayal, preparation. Daniel wasn't just cheating on me. He was preparing to leave me with nothing. And suddenly, that word he used, charity case took on a whole new meaning, because in his mind, that's exactly what I would have become. Dependent, discarded, irrelevant. But he made one mistake. He underestimated me. And more importantly, he forgot the prenup. I looked up at Michael. "Can he get away with this?" I asked. Michael shook his head slightly. "Not if you act before he finalizes the transfers," he said. Before. Timing. Everything came back to that word. "Then we don't wait," I said. He studied me for a moment. "You're sure he asked?" I didn't hesitate. Yes, because this wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about truth, justice, and finally, respect for myself. "Then we build your case," he said. Case. Not emotion, not reaction. Case. Something structured, something solid, something Daniel couldn't manipulate. As I left the cafe, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something stronger. Resolve. Because now, I wasn't just a wife uncovering a betrayal. I was a woman preparing for a battle, and this time, I wasn't going to lose. Building a case sounds simple when someone says it. In reality, it's slow, precise, and emotionally exhausting. Because every piece of evidence you collect forces you to face the truth again, and again, and again. Michael worked quietly behind the scenes, tracing accounts, following transfers, connecting names to entities I had never heard of before. Meanwhile, my job was different. I stayed inside the house, inside the marriage, inside the illusion Daniel still believed was intact, and that part was harder than anything else. "Morning," he said one day, walking into the kitchen like nothing had changed. "Morning," I replied, pouring coffee. We looked like a normal couple, same routine, same house, same silence. But now I could see it. Every gap, every distance, every moment where we were just acting. "You're quiet lately," he said, sitting down. I smiled faintly. "Just thinking," I replied. "About what life?" I said. "That wasn't a lie." He nodded, uninterested. "Don't overthink things," he said casually. That almost made me laugh, because overthinking was the only reason I wasn't about to be destroyed. That afternoon, Michael sent me an encrypted file. "Review this," the message said. Carefully. I sat at my desk, heart steady, hands calm, and opened it. It was worse than I expected. Not just financial transfers, but structure, layers, multiple shell companies, different states, different names, everything designed to make tracing difficult. Daniel hadn't just hidden money. He had built an entire system to disappear it. And Evelyn, she wasn't just involved, she was central. Her name appeared again and again, as a director, as a signatory, as someone with access I never had. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process it. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was long-term planning. Strategic, calculated, cold. I picked up my phone and called Michael. "He's planning to leave me," I said. There was no hesitation in my voice. "No," Michael replied calmly. "He's planning to replace you." That hit differently, because leaving implies an ending. Replacing implies. I was already being phased out, piece by piece. "Is he close?" I asked. "To finalizing everything." A pause. "Closer than you think," he said. "How long do I have?" Not long. Not long. That phrase echoed in my mind long after the call ended. Because now, This wasn't just about understanding. It was about timing, and I couldn't afford to be late. That evening, I made another move, a small one, calculated. I ran into an old friend today, I said casually during dinner. Daniel didn't look up. Yeah. Her husband left her, I continued. That got his attention. Really? He asked. Yes, I said. Turns out he had been hiding money for years. Silence. Subtle, but heavy. That's unfortunate, he said carefully. I watched him. Closely. Yeah, I said, but she had a good lawyer. He nodded, didn't respond, but his jaw tightened slightly. There it was. Fear. Not obvious, not dramatic, but real. Because now the idea had been planted, and I needed him to feel it. Just enough. Not too much. Not yet. The next day, Richard called me into his office. We need to talk about next steps, he said. I sat down across from him. Calm, focused. Michael has shared everything with me, he continued. Then, I said. I do, he replied. And Teresa, this is serious. I know. No, he said firmly. This isn't just divorce level serious. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He leaned forward. Some of these transfers could be considered fraudulent if they were done to deliberately hide marital assets. Fraud. The word hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. Are you saying I'm saying? Richard interrupted gently that your husband may have crossed a legal line. I sat back slowly, processing. Because this just shifted everything. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about exposure, consequences, real ones. What happens if we prove it? I asked. Richard didn't hesitate. He loses credibility in court, he said. Possibly more. Possibly more. That meant risk. For Daniel. And for me. Do we push that angle? I asked. Richard studied me carefully. That depends, he said. On what? On what you want, he replied. I didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, this wasn't just about reacting to Daniel. This was about choosing my own path. Did I want to destroy him? Expose everything? Make him face every consequence? Or did I want something else? Something cleaner? Something controlled? Something that gave me back my life, without dragging me through a war? I want security, I said finally, and truth. Richard nodded. Then we use this strategically, he said. Not emotionally. Strategically, that word again. Everything now came down to strategy. We prepare to file, he continued, but we don't yet. Why? Because timing will determine the outcome, he said. Timing. Always timing. That night, I lay in bed next to Daniel, listening to his breathing. Steady, calm, unbothered. He had no idea. No idea that his entire plan was unraveling. Quietly, methodically, right beside him. I turned slightly, looking at the man I had spent decades with. The man I had spent decades with. The man I had trusted. Built a life with. Loved. And for the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt distance. Clear. Cold. Final. Because the man I thought I knew didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had. And that realization had trusted. Built a life with. Loved. And for the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt distance, clear, cold, final. Because the man I thought I knew didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had. And that realization freed me, more than anything else, because now there was nothing left to hold on to. No illusions, no hope. Just truth and action. And very soon, Daniel Morgan was going to learn something he had never expected. I was never his charity case. I was the one person who could bring everything he built crashing down. The next phase wasn't about discovery anymore. It was about positioning. Every move had to be intentional, every word calculated, because now I knew what Daniel was doing. And soon, he would know that I knew. Richard called it controlled exposure. I called it the beginning of the end. We need him to feel pressure, Richard said during our meeting, but not panic. Why, I asked. Because panic makes people unpredictable, he replied. Pressure makes them make mistakes. That made sense. Daniel wasn't careless. He was disciplined, structured. But even disciplined people crack under the right kind of pressure. So, how do we do that? I asked. Richard leaned back. We let him think time is running out, he said. Time again. Always time. How? I asked. You bring up the prenup, he said. I froze slightly. The prenup. The one thing Daniel thought was irrelevant now. The one thing he had completely dismissed. You want me to confront him? I asked. Not confront, Richard corrected. Introduce the idea. Introduce. Subtle, controlled, strategic. I nodded slowly. I can do that. But the truth was, I hadn't said the word prenup out loud in years. Not since the day we signed it. Back when everything felt different. Back when I still believed we were building something together. That night I waited, timing. He came home later than usual. Again, loosening his tie like he had just worked a long, exhausting day. But I knew better now. Long day, I asked. Yeah, he said, dropping his keys. I watched him carefully. Do you ever think about the past, I asked? He paused, slightly confused. What do you mean? Just things we did when we first got married, I said. He shrugged. Not really. Of course he didn't, because for him, the past was something to move on from, not something to reflect on. I was thinking about the prenup, I said casually. There it was. The shift. Small, but immediate. His shoulders stiffened, almost imperceptibly. Why, he asked. The word came out too quickly, too sharp. I don't know, I said lightly. It just crossed my mind. He turned to face me. Fully now. That was a long time ago, he said. Yes, I agreed, but it still exists. Silence. Heavy. Measured. I don't think it matters anymore, he said. There it was. Dismissal. Confidence. Exactly what I expected. Maybe, I said, or maybe it matters more than we think. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger, in calculation. He was thinking now. Reevaluating. Good. That's what I needed. You've been acting strange lately, he said suddenly. There it was. Suspicion. But not certainty. Not yet. Have I asked calmly. Yes, he said. Distant. I smiled faintly. That's funny, I said. Why? Because I was about to say the same thing about you. He didn't respond immediately, because that was true, and truth is harder to argue with than lies. I've just been busy, he said finally. Me too, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. Then he walked away. Conversation over, but not resolved. And that was perfect, because now the seed had been planted. And Daniel Morgan was starting to think. The next day, Michael sent another update. Urgent, the message read. I opened it immediately. He's accelerating transfers, it said. My heart skipped. Accelerating. That meant pressure was working. He's moving more money faster. Michael continued in the call that followed. Why now, I asked. Because something made him uneasy, he said. The prenup, that conversation, it had landed exactly where it needed to. Is that good or bad? I asked. Needed to. Is that good or bad? I asked. It's both, he said. Good because he's making mistakes. Bad because we're running out of time. There it was again. Time slipping. Faster now. What kind of mistakes? I asked. He's using G accounts that are easier to trace. It's both, he said. Good because he's making mistakes. Bad because we're running out of time. There it was again. Time slipping. Faster now. What kind of mistakes? I asked. He's using accounts that are easier to trace, Michael said. Rushing. Rushing. That wasn't like Daniel, and that meant he was feeling something. Pressure. Fear. Doubt. Good. Because that meant he was no longer in control. Not completely. That evening, I made the second move. Stronger. Still controlled, but sharper. I spoke to a lawyer today, I said during dinner. This time, he didn't even try to hide it. His fork stopped midair. You what he asked? Calm voice. But his eyes, sharp. Alert. Just asking questions, I said. About what? About divorce. I replied. Silence. Total. Absolute. The air in the room changed instantly. You're serious? He asked. Should I not be? I said. He put his fork down slowly. What brought this on? He asked. There it was. The moment, the tension, the shift in power. Maybe I'm tired of feeling like I don't matter, I said. That wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. His jaw tightened. That's not fair, he said. Fair? I almost laughed. Isn't it? I asked quietly. He leaned back, studying me, trying to read me, trying to understand how much I knew. But I gave him nothing, no emotion, no anger, just calm. Dangerous calm. You're overreacting, he said finally. There it was, dismissal again, his default defense. I don't think I am, I replied. Another long silence. Then he stood up. I don't have time for this tonight, he said. Of course he didn't, because time was exactly what he was losing. He left the table, left the conversation, left me sitting there, watching the man who thought he controlled everything start to lose control. That night, he didn't come to bed. I heard him moving around downstairs, restless, on the phone, quiet, careful, but not careful enough. Because now, every move he made was part of my case. The next morning, Richard called. Michael updated me, he said. He's rushing, I replied. Yes, Richard said, which means we're close. Close. To what? The end or the explosion? We need to be ready, he continued. For what? For the moment he realizes he's been outplayed, Richard said. Outplayed. That word settled deep inside me, because for the first time, that's exactly what this felt like. Not a broken marriage, not a betrayal, a game. And Daniel was starting to lose. But the most dangerous part of any game is when one player realizes it's over, because that's when they stop playing fair. And something told me Daniel Morgan was not going to go down quietly. The shift came quietly. Not loud, not explosive, but unmistakable. Daniel stopped pretending. Not Daniel stopped pretending. Not completely, but enough for me to see it. The politeness was gone. The casual conversations disappeared. Even the illusion of normal started to fade, and in its place completely. But enough for me to see it. The politeness was gone. The casual conversations disappeared. Even the illusion of normal started to fade. And in its place, there was distance. Cold. Deliberate. Measured. "You're serious about this divorce thing?" he asked one morning. No greeting. No small talk. Just straight to the point. "Yes," I said. I didn't hesitate. Didn't soften it. Didn't hide behind anything. Because at this stage, clarity was power. He nodded slowly, like he was processing something, or maybe adjusting his strategy. "Okay," he said. That was it. No argument, no persuasion, no attempt to fix anything. Just, okay. And that told me everything. Because a man who wants to save his marriage doesn't say okay. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with a strange feeling in my chest. Not pain, not sadness, something else, something clearer. Finality. Later that day, Richard called. "That reaction is important," he said after I told him. "How?" I asked. "Because he's not fighting you," Richard explained. "He's accepting it, and that's bad. It means he already has a plan," he said. Of course he did. Daniel always had a plan. "He thinks he's ready," Richard continued. "But he's not." That gave me a small sense of control. But only a small one, because this next part was the most dangerous. "Michael confirmed he's consolidating assets," Richard added. "Into what?" I asked. "A final structure," he said. "Something he can walk away with." Walk away. That word hit differently now, because Daniel wasn't just preparing for divorce. He was preparing to disappear financially, to leave me with almost nothing. If I hadn't known, if I hadn't prepared, he would have succeeded. That realization didn't break me. It hardened me. That evening, I saw something new. Daniel was packing. Not fully, not obviously, but small things. Documents, a few personal items. Things that mattered, but wouldn't be noticed immediately. "Going somewhere?" I asked casually. He didn't look surprised. "No," he said, too quickly. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "You're packing?" I said. "Just organizing," he replied. Organizing. Another lie, but not a convincing one. "You always do that before a trip," I said quietly. He finally looked at me, directly, and for a moment, there was no mask, no control, just calculation. "What are you trying to say?" he asked. "I think you're leaving," I said. There it was, out in the open, the truth, or at least part of it. He didn't deny it, didn't confirm it either. Just watched me. "You wanted a divorce," he said. "I didn't say I wanted you to disappear," I replied. A beat of silence. Then he smirked slightly. "You'll be fine," he said. Those 3 words said everything. Dismissive, cold, arrogant, like I was an afterthought. like I didn't matter, like I never had. And that's when I knew. Without a doubt, without hesitation. Daniel Morgan believed he had already won. That night I called Michael. "He's preparing to leave," I said. "I know," Michael replied. "You know, we saw movement today," he said. "Large transfers." "How large?" "A significant portion," he answered. My stomach tightened. "How much time do we have?" "Very little," he said. "Very little, again." Time closing in. "We need to act," I said. "Not yet," Michael replied. That frustrated me. "Why not?" I asked. "Because we don't just need evidence," he said. "We need the right moment." That word again. Moment. Timing. Everything depended on it. "If we move too early," he continued, "he'll lock everything down. And if we wait too long, he disappears." That was the line. Thin, sharp, dangerous. And we were walking right on it. The next day, something unexpected happened. Evelyn showed up. At my house. Unannounced. Uninvited. Unwelcome. I opened the door. And there she was. Perfectly composed. Like she belonged there. "Teresa," she said with a polite smile. "Evelyn," I replied. My voice was calm, but inside, everything sharpened. "Can we talk?" she asked. I studied her for a moment. This woman, the one who thought she could replace me, the one who had been quietly helping my husband erase me. "Sure," I said. Because sometimes the best way to understand your enemy is to let them speak. She stepped inside, looking around like she was already evaluating the space, measuring it, claiming it. We sat down, across from each other. 2 women, 1 marriage, 1 truth. "I think we should be honest with each other," she began. "Honest." That almost made me smile. "I agree," I said. She nodded. "As you know," she continued, "Daniel and I have been working closely together." Working closely. Such a careful phrase. "So I've noticed," I replied. She didn't flinch. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said. There it was, the lie, wrapped in soft words. "I'm here because I think it's better if we handle this maturely." Maturely. Meaning quietly. Meaning without resistance. Meaning on their terms. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. She leaned forward slightly. "That you don't make this difficult," she said. There it was. Finally. No more pretending, no more politeness. Just strategy. "You've had a good life," she continued. "You'll be taken care of. Taken care of. Like I was something to manage, something to settle, something to close." "I don't need to be taken care of," I said calmly. She tilted her head slightly. "Everyone needs something," she said. "Not me. Not anymore." "I think you're underestimating me," I replied. A flicker. Just a small one. But I saw it. Doubt. "You don't want this to get ugly," she said. And that was the first real warning, not a suggestion. A warning. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You came all this way to tell me that I asked." She held my gaze. "Yes." I nodded slowly. "Then let me be just as clear," I said. Her expression tightened slightly. "I'm not going anywhere," I continued. Silence. Sharp. Heavy. "And I'm not afraid of ugly." That landed. I saw it in her eyes. For the first time, She wasn't completely in control. She stood up, smoothing her jacket. "Well," she said, forcing a small smile, "I tried." Tried. Yes, she did. But she had no idea what she was walking into. She walked to the door, paused, and looked back. "You should think carefully about your next move," she said. I met her gaze. "I already have," I replied. She left, and the moment the door closed, I exhaled slowly, because now everything was out in the open. No more guessing, no more assumptions, just two sides, and one inevitable collision. That night, I called Richard. "It's time," I said. He didn't hesitate. "I agree." The line had been crossed. The moment had arrived, and very soon, Daniel Morgan was going to learn exactly what it meant to underestimate me. The day everything moved started like any other, quiet, controlled, deceptively normal. But underneath that calm surface, everything was about to break. Richard had told me the night before, tomorrow is the day. Not maybe, not soon, tomorrow. Because Daniel had made his final move. Michael confirmed it at 7:12 a.m. "He's executing the last transfer," he said. My heart didn't race. It didn't panic. It steadied, because this was the moment we had been waiting for. "Is everything in place?" I asked. "Yes," Michael replied. "We've tracked the accounts. We have the paper trail. We have intent. Intent. That was the key. Not just what he did, but why he did it." "And the prenup?" I asked. "Your strongest weapon?" Michael said. I exhaled slowly. After all these years, that document, the one he dismissed, the one he forgot, was about to define everything. Richard joined the call minutes later. "It's time to confront him," he said. "No more strategy. No more waiting. Just action." "Today?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "before he disappears. Because that's what Daniel was planning. Not just divorce. Escape. Clean. Calculated. Permanent." "I understand," I said, and I did. Completely. That afternoon, I set the stage. Dinner. At home. Simple. Familiar. Controlled. I even cooked his favorite meal. Not because I cared, but because routine makes people comfortable. And comfortable people make mistakes. He came home at exactly 6:18 p.m., right on time, like always. But something was different. He wasn't pretending anymore. His movements were sharper, faster, like someone who had already mentally left. "Dinner smells good," he said. Polite, distant. "Sit," I replied. He did. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Then I put my fork down. I spoke to my lawyer again. I said, there it was. The opening move. He didn't react immediately. Just chewed slowly, swallowed, then looked at me. "Okay," he said. Still calm, still controlled. But I could see it. Underneath. Tension. I also reviewed the prenup. I added. That's when it hit. Not visibly, but internally. His eyes sharpened. His posture stiffened. "Why now?" he asked. Same question. Different tone. Because now. It mattered. Because I finally understand it, I said. That was the truth. For the first time, I really did. He leaned back slightly, studying me, trying to read how much I knew, trying to calculate his next move. But this time, he was already too late. "I think we should go over it together," I said. Silence. Long, heavy. Then he smiled, small, controlled, fake. I don't think that's necessary, he said. Of course he didn't, because he thought it no longer applied. I do, I replied, calm, unmoving. He held my gaze, and for the first time there was something new in his eyes. Not confidence, not control, uncertainty. Teresa, he said slowly, what are you doing? That question almost made me laugh. What was I doing? I was finishing what he started. I'm protecting myself, I said. He nodded once, like he understood, but he didn't, not yet. I think you're overcomplicating things, he said. There it was again, dismissal, his favorite tool, but it didn't work anymore. I don't think I am, I said. Then I reached into my bag and placed it on the table. The folder, thin, simple, powerful. His eyes dropped to it, then back to me. What's that? He asked. You know what it is? I said. He didn't touch it, didn't open it, because something inside him, the folder, thin, simple, powerful. His eyes dropped to it, then back to me. What's that? He asked. You know what it is, I said. He didn't touch it, didn't open it, because something inside him was already reacting. Instinct, fear, recognition. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. No arrogance now, no confidence, just pressure. Am I asked. He leaned forward slightly. Whatever you think you know, he said, it's not what you think. That was new. Not denial, not dismissal, deflection. Which meant he knew, at least part of it. I think it is, I said. Then I slid the folder toward him. Open it. Silence. He didn't move, for a few seconds. We just sat there, locked in place, then slowly. He reached forward and opened it. The first page, the prenup, highlighted, marked, annotated, by Richard, by Michael, by people who understood every line, every clause, every hidden protection. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched his expression shift, piece by piece. Confidence fading, control slipping. Because now he was seeing it, really seeing it. What is this? He asked. But his voice already knew the answer. This, I said calmly, is the agreement you signed. That doesn't, he started. It does, I interrupted, and that was the first time I had ever cut him off. He froze. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't. Calm, firm, unshakable. You should keep reading, I said. He did, and the more he read, the quieter he became. Because the prenup wasn't what he remembered, not what he assumed, not what he had built his entire plan around. It protected me, completely, not just from divorce, but from fraud, from asset concealment, from exactly what he had been doing, and now he knew it. This is outdated, he said finally. Weak. Reaching. No, I said. It's very current. His jaw tightened. You don't understand, he said. I understand perfectly, I replied. And I did. Better than he ever expected. You can't prove anything, he said. There it was, the last defense. Denial. I leaned back, looked at him, and for the first time I allowed myself to smile. Not softly, not politely, but knowingly. Michael says otherwise, I said. That name hit him hard. His entire body reacted, just slightly. But enough. Who? He asked. But his voice betrayed him. He knew. Of course he knew. Because Michael had been watching him, following him, documenting everything. Your transfers, I continued. Your accounts, your timing. Every word, of course he knew. Because Michael had been watching him, following him, documenting everything. Your transfers, I continued. Your accounts, your timing. Every word, another crack. You've been very busy, I added. Silence, total, absolute. And in that silence, everything changed. Because Daniel Morgan finally understood. He wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't ahead. He wasn't winning. He had been exposed. And for the first time since I met him, he looked at me like he didn't know who I was. The silence after that moment was deafening. Daniel didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't deny. He just stared at the papers. Like if he looked long enough, they might change. They didn't, and neither did I. You planned this, he finally said. Not a question, a statement. Low, tight, controlled. I folded my hands on the table. I prepared, I corrected. Because that mattered. Planning was manipulation. Preparation was survival. His jaw tightened. You went behind my back, he said. There it was, the shift, from control to accusation. I almost smiled, because suddenly, he sounded like the victim. I learned from the best, I said quietly. That hit him, harder than anything else I'd said. Because it was true. Everything I had done, he had taught me. Every move, every layer, every calculation. He stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand what you're doing, he said, his voice louder now, sharper, more desperate. I understand exactly what I'm doing, I replied. Still seated, still calm. That contrast was driving him crazy. You think this document saves you? He snapped. It doesn't just save me, I said. It exposes you. That was the line, the one he couldn't ignore, the one that broke through everything. His eyes darkened. Dangerous. Be very careful, Teresa, he said. A warning. Not subtle, not polite. Real. I stood up slowly, met his height, matched his presence. I think you should take your own advice, I said. Silence. Heavy. Then he laughed. Short. Cold. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he said. And for the first time, I saw it. The real Daniel. Not the polished version. Not the charming one. The one underneath. The one who thought power meant control over people. You're right, I said. That caught him off guard. Because he expected resistance, argument, fear, not agreement. I didn't, I continued. But I do now. And that changed everything. He stared at me, trying to read me, trying to find weakness, trying to regain control. But there was none. Not anymore. You think this ends well for you? He asked. It already has, I replied, because the moment I stopped being afraid, I had already won. That truth unsettled him more than anything else. He looked down at the papers again, then back at me. What do you want? He asked. Finally, the real question, not control, not dominance, negotiation. I want what's mine, I said. Simple, clear, non-negotiable. You'll get a settlement, he said quickly, still trying to lead, still trying to define the terms. "I'm not asking for a settlement," I replied. That stopped him completely. "I'm enforcing an agreement." And that was the difference. A settlement is compromise, an agreement is law. He exhaled sharply, ran a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked disoriented. "You're making this worse than it needs to be," he said. No, I was making it exactly what it needed to be. Honest. "You made it worse," I said. "I'm just revealing it." That landed. Because deep down, he knew it was true. There was a long pause. Then he said something unexpected. "You really think you can walk away with everything?" Everything. That word again. Heavy, loaded, misunderstood. "I don't need everything," I said. That confused him. "I just need what's right." And that he didn't understand. Because Daniel had never cared about what was right. Only what was possible. Only what he could take. "Right doesn't matter in situations like this," he said. There it was. His truth. Cold. Practical. Ruthless. "It does now," I replied. Because for once, he wasn't the one writing the rules. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Sharp. Precise. Unexpected. Daniel froze. His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. "What did you do?" he asked. Quiet. Dangerous. I didn't answer. I just walked past him and opened the door. Richard stood there, calm, collected, professional. Behind him was someone else, a woman, mid-40s, serious, focused. "Good evening, Teresa," Richard said. "Evening," I replied. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." They did. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. But I could feel it, the shift, the realization. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. This was official. "Daniel," Richard said calmly. "I'm Richard Hayes." No introduction needed. The tone said everything. "And this is Miss Laura Bennett," he added. She stepped forward slightly. "Financial investigator," she said. Direct, clear, no room for misunderstanding. Daniel's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "Investor?" he asked. "Investigator," she corrected. Another shift. Small, precise, devastating. "I'm here regarding several financial movements tied to your accounts," she continued. Clinical, professional, unemotional. Exactly what this moment required. Daniel laughed again. But this time, it sounded different. Forced. "You can't just walk into my house and accuse me of something," he said. "You're right," Richard said calmly. Then he handed him a document. "But we can with this." Daniel took it, looked at it, and for a moment, everything stopped. Because this wasn't just pressure anymore. This wasn't just confrontation. This was consequence. Real, legal, immediate. "What is this?" he asked. But his voice was no longer steady. "A notice," Richard said, "of formal investigation and pending legal action." There it was, out in the open. No more games, no more control, just reality. Daniel looked at me, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no confidence, no calculation, just one thing. Shock. "You did this?" he asked. I met his gaze. Steady, unflinching. "I protected myself," I said. And in that moment, everything he had built started to collapse. I didn't feel powerful, not in the way people imagine. There was no rush, no victory high, just clarity. Cold, steady clarity. Because as Daniel stood there holding that document, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. Everything he had done was finally catching up to him. "You set me up," he said. His voice was lower now, quieter, but far more dangerous. I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "You walked into it." Because he had. Every transfer, every lie, every decision had been his. Laura stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Morgan," she said, calm and precise, "we've been tracking financial discrepancies tied to your accounts for several months." "Months?" Daniel's eyes flicked to me, then back to her. "You've been watching me?" he asked. His voice cracked just a little. That was new. "We've been documenting activity," she corrected, again with the precision, every word chosen, every tone controlled. "This is harassment," Daniel snapped, grasping, reaching, losing control. Richard didn't react. "This is procedure," he said, flat, unmoved. Daniel looked at me again, longer this time, harder. "How long?" he asked. That question meant everything, because it wasn't about the investigation. It was about me. How long had I known? How long had I been pretending I held his gaze? Long enough, I said. And that answer unraveled him, because it forced him to replay everything, every conversation, every moment he thought he was ahead. Now, all of it felt different. All of it felt like a lie. "You played me," he said. There it was again. Victim. But this time, there was something else underneath. Fear. "I survived you," I replied. That was the truth. And it hit harder than anything else, because deep down, he knew exactly what he had done. To me, to us, to this marriage. "You're destroying everything," he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I'm ending what you already broke." Silence. Heavy. Final. Laura opened her folder, pulled out several documents. "Mr. Morgan, she said we have records of multiple offshore transfers, shell accounts, and undeclared holdings." Each word, another blow. Daniel's face tightened. "This is ridiculous," he said, but there was no strength behind it, no conviction, just reaction. "You'll have the opportunity to respond formally," Richard added. "Professional, controlled, unshakable. This isn't over," Daniel said. And that was the last thing he had left. Threat, because control was gone. Power was gone. Only resistance remained. "No," I said quietly. "It's just beginning." And I meant it, because this wasn't just about exposing him. It was about reclaiming myself. The woman I had been before I started shrinking to fit his world, before I started doubting my own worth, before I believed his version of me. Charity case. That word echoed in my head, not as pain anymore, but as fuel, because now I understood something. He needed me to feel small so he could feel big. He needed me to doubt myself so I wouldn't question him. And the moment I stopped believing that, everything changed. "You think people will believe you?" he said suddenly. "One last attempt, one last angle." "They will believe the evidence," I said, "because truth doesn't need performance. It just needs exposure." Richard glanced at me briefly. A subtle nod. Support. Confirmation. This was real. This was happening. Daniel looked around the room, like he was seeing it for the first time. The house, the space, the life we had built. And for a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret. Maybe. Or just realization that he had lost. Not just the money, not just the control, but me. "You could have just left," he said quietly. That line almost broke something in me, because for a second I remembered who he used to be, or who I thought he was. "I did leave," I said, "just not the way you expected." And that was the truth. I didn't walk out. I didn't run. I stayed. I watched. I learned. And then I stepped out of his shadow. On my terms. Laura closed her folder. "We'll be in contact through legal channels," she said. "Formal." "Final." She turned toward the door. Richard followed. But before he left, he looked at me. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. That question. Laura closed her folder. "Well, be in contact through legal channels," she said. Formal. Final. She turned toward the door. Richard followed. But before he left, he looked at me. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. That question hit me harder than everything else, because for the first time in a long time, I actually considered it. Was I okay? I took a breath. Slow, deep. "Yes," I said. And I meant it. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. Because okay didn't mean everything was fixed. It meant I was no longer broken. They left. The door closed. And suddenly, it was just us again. Me and Daniel. But everything was different. The power, the silence, the space between us. "What happens now?" he asked. Not as a threat, not as a command, but as a man who no longer had control. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel small. I just felt free. "Now," I said, "you face the consequences." And I turned away, because this time, I didn't need to stay. The house felt different the next morning. Not empty, not broken, just quiet in a new way. Like something heavy had finally been lifted. Daniel was gone. Not dramatically. No goodbye, no confrontation, just gone. His side of the closet was half empty. A few suits missing. Important documents gone. Exactly as I expected. Because Daniel didn't do emotional exits. He did calculated ones. But this time, he didn't get away clean. I walked slowly through the house, room by room, not searching, not checking, just seeing, really seeing. For the first time in years. This wasn't his house. It wasn't his life. It wasn't his success. It was ours. And now, it was mine to reclaim. My phone buzzed. Richard. "It's done," he said. "What is?" I asked. "We've filed," he replied. "Filed. Legal. Official. Irreversible. How did he respond? I asked. A pause. He retained counsel, Richard said. Strong one. Of course he did. Daniel always surrounded himself with strength. Power. Control. But this time, it wasn't enough. Are we ready? I asked. Yes, he said, and Teresa were in a very strong position. Strong. That word meant something different now. It didn't mean aggressive. It didn't mean dominant. It meant protected, prepared, unbreakable. What happens next? I asked. Negotiation, he said. Then court, if necessary. Necessary. I thought about that for a moment. Court, public, exposed, messy, but also final. I'm ready, I said, and I was. More than I ever expected. The next few weeks moved fast. Meetings, documents, calls, strategy. Daniel tried to fight. At first. Of course he did. Challenged the prenup, questioned the investigation, pushed back on everything. But every time he did, the evidence pushed harder. The transfers, the accounts, the intent. It all pointed to one thing. He had tried to outplay the system and lost. Evelyn disappeared quickly, not physically, but strategically, distanced herself, removed her name from anything she could. Because people like her don't stay when things get difficult. They survive by detaching. And Daniel, for the first time, he stood alone. That realization didn't bring me joy. It brought me clarity, because I finally understood something. He didn't just lose me. He lost the one person who had ever been truly on his side, unconditionally. And he traded that for control, for ego, for something that didn't last. One afternoon, I saw him again. Across a conference table, lawyers on both sides, documents spread between us. He looked older, not dramatically, but noticeably. Like the weight of everything had finally settled in. Teresa, he said. My name. Soft, almost unfamiliar. Daniel, I replied. No emotion, no anger, just acknowledgement. We sat down. The negotiation began. Numbers, assets, terms. Cold, precise, necessary. This is excessive, his lawyer said at one point. Richard didn't react. It's compliant with the agreement, he replied. Agreement. That word again. The one Daniel forgot. The one that defined everything now. Daniel looked at me, really looked, for the first time since all of this started. You planned this from the beginning, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, I said. I just remembered who I was, and that was something he couldn't argue with, because deep down he knew. He had just hoped I wouldn't. The negotiation didn't end that day, but it didn't need to, because the outcome was already clear. Weeks later, it was finalized. The house, shared assets, financial compensation, security, freedom. Everything the prenup promised was enforced. Not out of revenge, but out of truth. The day I signed the final papers, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed, deep, full, free. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't living under someone else's version of my life. I was living in mine. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, the same room where everything had started to change, the same room where I once felt small, invisible, replaceable. Now I felt something else. Whole. Complete. Enough. I picked up my phone, scrolled for a moment, then paused. Because I realized something. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of something else. Something quieter, stronger, more honest. My life. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a relationship isn't betrayal. It's silence. The kind that slowly erases you. The kind that convinces you that you are less important, less capable, less worthy. I believed that silence for years. I believed the version of myself that someone else created. Until one day, I didn't. And that changed everything. Here's what I've learned. You don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself in small moments. When you stay quiet instead of speaking. When you accept less instead of asking for more. When you trust someone else's version of you more than your own. But the opposite is also true. You don't find yourself all at once either. You find yourself the moment you start asking questions. The moment you start paying attention. The moment you decide you deserve the truth. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it changes everything. Especially then. Because truth doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. And once you see clearly, you can't go back. But you also don't want to. Because clarity is freedom. If you've ever felt like you were shrinking in your own life, like you were becoming invisible in your own story, I want you to know this. You are not small. You are not powerless. And you are definitely not someone else's charity case. You just haven't seen your own strength yet, but it's there. Waiting. For the moment you decide to stand up and claim it. So tell me, have you ever ignored a truth you knew deep down? What would you do if you finally faced it? I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we need the most are the ones that remind us who we really are.